Caregivers are often concerned that their loved ones may be vulnerable to financial frauds and scams. How can we protect our loved ones and ourselves? On today's Caring for Caregivers conversation, we talk with Doug Shadel, a nationally recognized fraud prevention expert and longtime leader in AARP's fight against scams. Doug has spent decades researching and educating on how scammers operate and how people can better protect themselves. He's the co-author of multiple books and studies on fraud, is a former Washington State fraud investigator, and has testified as an expert witness for the U.S. Department of Justice. There's a lot to talk about. Here's my conversation with Doug Shadel. Hi, Doug. Thanks for coming this afternoon.
That's my pleasure.
It's good to have you. You are our local and national fraud expert. So tell me a little bit what got you into fraud and scams.
Well, a long time ago, I worked for the Attorney General's office as an investigator, and I did that for about 10 years. And after a while, I got very frustrated by the fact that I couldn't really catch any of these con men who were ripping people off. The last case I worked on, I spent a year chasing this guy in Vancouver, Washington, who had ripped off millions of dollars from seniors, and we finally sued him, and he moved 10 miles south to Portland and started a new company.
Wow.
And so at that point, I went to the Attorney General and said, is there any way that I could do some consumer education and get to people before the scammers do? He let me do that, and I spent the last 4 years in the AG's office doing that. And in the process of doing that kind of outreach, met people at AARP. Then when my boss lost, I went to work for AARP, and I worked there for a long time, doing roughly the same kind of stuff, a lot of consumer education and so forth.
So this is now decades, right, of work in fraud and scams.
Yeah.
Can you explain or tell a little bit about the impact that fraud and scams are having on families, family caregivers, and their loved ones?
Yeah. It's having an enormous impact. We used to say, for years we were looking for who is the most vulnerable person, who really is most likely to get scammed, if you will. And in the early days, what we would do figuratively is fly over a football stadium and drop 60,000 brochures out in the stadium, hoping that by reaching everyone, we'd also reach, the 10 to 15% who really lose money. And that's not a very efficient way to go about things. So we started a research agenda to say, who are those 10%? And we looked for years for some kind of a demographic profile, some kind of a unifying theory of here's the people who are most likely. And it started out, the conventional wisdom was it's always seniors. Seniors lose their cognitive ability as they get older and so forth, and they're more vulnerable. Well, it turns out they are not the most likely victims of fraud.
Who's the most likely?
Well, it evolved over time. We couldn't really find a predictor that would, a characteristic that would predict all vulnerability. For seniors, it's like, more seniors lose money to sweepstakes scams, something to investment scams. But it didn't predict who loses money to online scams, right? And what we started to do to solve this problem was interview the con men themselves.
Wow.
And we interviewed, Bruce Carls from AARP Washington and I would travel all over and interview. We interviewed 24 convicted scammers. And the way we would reach them is they would plead guilty to some kind of felony. And then we would contact their defense lawyer and say, your guy hasn't been sentenced yet. And if you talk to AARP, maybe he'll get a lighter sentence. And that kind of worked. We ended up interviewing a lot of these scammers that way. And when you ask them, what is the central strategy you use to defraud people, they always start with the same sentence: get them under the ether. And at first we're like, ether? What does that mean? That's not a very scientific word. You have to call it something else. What they mean is get them into a heightened emotional state so that the cognitive part of their mind is no longer engaged and they're reacting emotionally, because it's just easier to persuade people that way. right? And so that started a whole new branch of the research agenda, which is, okay, well, how do they get them under the ether? Well, let's look and see what kind of persuasion tactics they use and so forth. We did a whole bunch of stuff like that. And one of the most important pieces of research we did was we partnered with Stanford University. This is probably 10 years ago now. And I don't know how to do this, but Stanford's Mood Lab, they brought 200 people into a lab, right? And they divided them into 3 groups. One group, they artificially got them into a positive excited state. In a second condition, into a negative, like you're fearful, emotional state, and a control group. Then we put false advertising in front of all 3 groups. The theory was, or the hypothesis was, the group with the heightened emotions, positive or negative, would be more likely to fall for the reactive, which is exactly what we found. And this sort of was the first time we had actual data that showed that this thing called, the con men called ether, really emotional arousal is what it is a huge risk factor. And so that we started to incorporate that into our prevention messages, which is to say, if somebody calls you up and all of a sudden you're afraid because they're threatening you with something, somebody hacked into your account, somebody stole your identity, and your heart starts beating faster and beads of sweat form on your forehead, that's the time to slow down and not react, because that's when you're most vulnerable. Another study, this is the last one, I don't want to go too deep into the research, but before I left AARP, the last study we did was we surveyed 3,000 people who had all encountered a scam in the preceding 12 months. 2,000 of them were able to resist and not lose money. 1,000 of them lost money. What was the difference between those 2 groups? The group that lost money had experienced twice as many stressful events in the months leading up to the encounter compared to the group that could resist. Well, what do we mean by a stressful event? I'm taking care of my mother. I'm recovering from an illness. I just got divorced. There's a whole list of things that are, and these are things you can't really avoid in life, everybody, especially nowadays. Right. But it gave us another sort of piece of content to deliver to people saying, listen, you can't really avoid this, but if you're encountering some kind of stressful event right now, be especially cautious when somebody calls you up or you're making a financial transaction. So those are some of the pieces that led us kind of to the way we do consumer ed now. It turns out that it's less about who you are, and it's more about how you are at the moment of the encounter. So caregivers, there's nothing more enervating than taking care of mom or taking care of your husband or whatever. And so those people are particularly vulnerable.
So when we talk about you've talked about the heightened state, right? And if there's additional stress, so it sounds like both family caregivers and those who might be suffering from some kind of illness or condition where they do actually need care might be at greater risk, that's for sure. Is there a difference between men and women, by the way? Just curious.
Not really, not that we can find.
Interesting.
And this is what I mean by these demographic characteristics we sort of held on to. There's not a lot. There is some evidence that the lower income you are, the more you might go for some of those, like, hey, we could get you out of debt type of scams. Yeah. But even race wasn't much of a variable.
Interesting.
It's really these other sort of intangible things like stress and your life situation.
So tell us about the kinds of scams that are going on out there right now. I mean, I think we hear a little bit about the romance scams. Everyone's probably familiar with those pop-ups that come up on our computer, and certainly you get those phone calls. But so what's going on right now out there?
Well, you can divide them into the simplest overview is to divide them into 2 buckets. One type of bucket, and these are sort of tactics scammers used to get you into that ether, right, is, I would say, promise of financial gain. These are the classic, you've won Publishers Clearinghouse, right. You're going to make $1 million, you can get all this passive income by doing nothing and mining for cyber those kinds of things. And we did a study about 15 years ago of transcripts that the Ohio AG's office gave us, where they took over a victim's line and recorded all of the calls coming in. When we analyzed those, the vast majority of them were promises of financial gain, right? You've won this, you've won that.
Right.
We just finished a study that I did working with Nomo Robo of 4.5 million robocall transcripts. Nomo Robo actually tapes and transcribes all of the calls they block, which from a researcher standpoint is just a total gold mine, which is why I have been working with them for so long. And what has changed is it's no longer just the promises of financial gain, but there's far more threats of loss. Somebody's hacked into your computer. This is Amazon fraud prevention, and somebody just charged a new iPhone. All of those types of things. And when we analyze the text, a lot of the robocalls are moving to texts. You may have gotten some of these texts yourself. 90% of those are threats of loss. Almost all of them are like, you better get back to me right now because something horrible is going to happen to you. Well, there's nothing more stress-inducing than that. And, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world anyway, so people are stressed out anyway. And so I would say promises of gain types of approaches. And the other thing that's fraud complaints to the Federal Trade Commission have increased 25% in 1 year.
In 1 year?
In 1 year.
So what changed?
A couple things have collided to make this sort of the perfect storm, if you will. One is the number of people don't think about this, but there was a while there where you couldn't go a week without hearing about some data breach.
Right. The data breach.
I go into audiences and say, every single one of us in this room has already had their identity stolen. There isn't, and multiple times probably. Which means for the scammer, there's a lot more information about us available to them. And it isn't even on the dark web. It used to be only, you have to go to the dark web to do this. Right. You can go above ground, above web, and find it. It's everywhere. And I've been taking some of these calls just to see what they say. And they know everything about the person they're calling. They already know their social security number. They already know their date of birth. So the amount of information makes it harder to figure out whether it's real or not, because if they have that much information about me, that must be real. The other thing is, back 15, 20 years ago, we'd interview these con men, and they'd go, oh, yeah, I worked in this boiler room, and I had to make 200-300 calls a day. I might reach 10 people, and they're manually dialing, right? And maybe one or two of them will talk to me. Now a scammer can press a button, and 250,000 robocalls go out. It's all a numbers game anyway, and so 10% of 250,000 is a much larger number, than 10% of 200 calls you manually dial. So I think contactability, for lack of a better word, is they could just reach more people with. And then the final piece, which I know you want to talk about, is the AI revolution, which is just the ease with which relatively low-skilled people can create fictitious images and pretend to be somebody they're not. I'm in the workshops that I give now, I actually show them how I can do it. I'm a 60-year-old non-digital native. I don't know anything about computers, but I have, Google Gemini, and I can go online, and I literally show them, create a picture of a 68-year-old Hispanic man with graying hair who's got bifocals on, and he's wearing a green shirt. Click. And 60 seconds later, a perfectly original image that I have the rights to use, by the way, because it's not an image they found on the internet. It's an image that the system created based on what I told it to create. Text to photo. Then there's text to video. And we've started to make some PSAs where we go. I'll show you a story that I share in my workshops. About a year ago, Amy Knopfsinger from AARP's helpline gave me the name of a guy in North Carolina who had just gotten divorced. He's 70 years old. He lives by himself. And he's on Facebook one day, and this beautiful woman messages him. And all she says is, I saw your profile on Facebook, and I'd like to meet you. right?
I get those requests.
Do you?
I do.
Don't answer them,
Okay.
Marguerite. And I'll tell you what happened. I'll tell you why. So he goes, I'm not really looking for love right now, but boy, that's an attractive woman. And so he innocently responds to her.
Right.
And she does this thing, which is the start of a romance scam, right? Which is she starts love bombing him. Oh my God, you are, I just got divorced myself, and yada, yada, yada. She takes him offline to her WhatsApp account, right, which has end-to-end encryption, so it's secure for her. And after 5,000 texts and 3 months, she starts talking about her lifestyle and how she can afford all these beautiful, because she's sending him pictures of her by a pool and everything.
Sure.
Yeah. My uncle, it turns out, is an expert at cryptocurrency investing. He ends up investing $40,000 with her, right? And he's with his buddies one night telling them about this, and they're like, oh, you're getting scammed. No, I'm not. I'm in love with this. Besides, I'm in love with this woman. And they say, well, if it's not a scam, why don't you ask for a refund? If she gives you a refund, then it's not a scam. So he goes the next day and asks for a refund. And she turns on him. Oh, my God, you remind me just of my ex-husband. You're a liar. I hate you. And she ghosts him. In the meantime, what she had been doing is she created a fake website that looked just like a crypto company.
Sure.
He'd invest $5,000, and then the next day she'd go, look at your account. It's $6,500. You gained $1,500 in one day. Well, that's because she's the administrator of that account, and she can make it look like whatever it wants.
Right.
Anyway, so we took that example and said we should make a PSA about this. So I go onto Google Gemini, write this down, text to video, and I'm like, make a video of a beautiful woman of Greek descent, because that's what this woman looked like, who's sitting by a pool, and the wind is blowing through her hair and everything. And she turns to the camera and says, I saw your profile on Facebook, and I'd like to meet you. And I press send. 60 seconds later, this video of this beautiful woman's like, I saw your book, And I'm like, I'm in love with this woman. I just created her, Then we did another one. So then we built these things where it's like, this is the pitch. This is what they want, how they want you to respond. So now I'm doing another one. Do a picture of a guy who's 75 years old, and he's sitting at his computer, and he's responding by saying, well, I don't know who you are, but I don't see any harm in meeting you, right? That's the victim.
Sure.
And the punchline is you do another one saying, here's what a fraud fighter says. And you do a picture of a guy who says, well, I'd love to meet you, but I just did a reverse image search, and you're on a number of dating websites saying the same thing to other people. Goodbye, right?
Yeah.
And so, in other words, and so it's partly, I think, the chore here for our people, and I'm one of them, right, 68-year-old, is to show how easy it is to use AI to pretend to be somebody you're not, and you just can't trust it.
We've heard a lot about these data breaches, right, where somebody's taken all of our healthcare information, and like you said, they likely have all the information about us already. So why do they actually have to reach us to defraud us? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And that's a really good question, because that comes up a lot. Again, interviewing the con man, I've asked them that question. Why don't you just, if you have all this information about people,
why don't you just open up credit cards or whatever?
Or just brute force your way in because you've got their passwords and everything. That is the goal, ultimately, to get into their accounts. But scammers are lazy.
Okay.
It's way harder. It's much easier to convince somebody out of panic and ether that they are on your side, and they voluntarily give you all these things, right? In other words, they don't have all the information.
Okay.
They don't have the password to my personal bank account,
Okay.
but they might have all the stuff around it that convinces me that they are who they say they are.
Got it.
And then that last piece is what they're looking for.
I think that's really important, that there's still information that is protected, right? It might be your bank account information, could be the actual credit card numbers, maybe, that are protected.
Well, it's important to make a distinction between identity theft and identity fraud.
Okay.
Identity theft means your information's out there.
Right.
And everyone's is out there. But converting it to the point where you actually lose money as a result is what you're trying to avoid. So the biggest tip we can give people about that is monitoring. I'm really big on monitoring,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Online access to your bank account, have them notify. Like with my credit cards, if I use it or anyone uses it, I get an alert.
Yep,
Right?
I do too.
And the banks don't want this fraud any more than you
Right.
do because they're responsible for most of it if it goes south, right?
Right.
So stuff like that. And people ask, well, what about these $30 a month things where somebody else monitors for you? There's nothing wrong with that. But most of it you can do yourself
Right.
for a lot cheaper.
What advice would you give to family caregivers? How would you spot, what signs are there for you to spot that your loved one might be caught up in a scam?
Well, a lot of the time when this happens, especially with the romance scams, is if your loved one all of a sudden stops talking to you. Most people have a patterned conversational style with their loved one, whether it's the mom or the dad or whatever. And if you start to sense that they're not responding in the way they were before, they're starting to hide the conversations, not willing to talk about money all of a sudden when there was never a barrier like that. Those are telltale signs. And I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed where the family member noticed that, but they didn't know what to do. It was really hard to know how to break through. And and there's some good guidance on this. The AARP helpline has some good stuff on this.
Okay.
But one thing not to do is to try and create some kind of a judgment to judge like if you do
Right.
find out, okay, they're meeting this person. We did some focus groups years back where we asked people this, and they all said, I don't know what works, but I can tell you what doesn't work. The first thing I said to Mom was, how could you be so stupid? As soon as you say that,
Yeah.
the walls go up.
Right.
They start hiding money. It doesn't work. You have to be willing to be empathetic and forgiving on the front end of it, just to start with. Otherwise, you're going to go nowhere because they will not confide with you,
You started the conversation about telling us about your time at the Inspector General, the Attorney General, the Attorney General's office. Are we more likely to catch the con men now than we were before?
Well, I can tell you one thing positively that has changed. For a long time, law enforcement didn't think this was important. It didn't involve murder. It didn't involve threats to, espionage, international security. Everyone in the world, this is the number one crime in America now, and everyone will tell you that. And the number of, I went to a conference last April, the RSA conference. It was just crypto, cybersecurity people. 30,000 people. There were 30,000 professionals fighting cybercrime at this conference.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's a city.
Wow, that's great.
So
That's great.
I think the good news, whether we're actually making progress reducing it, I think is a different question. But it's certainly on everyone's radar, and I take a lot of hope with that.
That's great. We should tackle one or two more things. One of them is crypto kiosks.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about crypto kiosks, what they are, and what should somebody do if somebody says, I want you to withdraw money from your bank and I want you to go and deposit it into a crypto ATM or a crypto kiosk.
Remember how we started talking about ether? Mm-hmm. Ether is when you're in a heightened emotional state. Heightened emotions, by definition, are fleeting. That is to say, they go away quickly. So the con man does all this work. That means he needs his money fast. Historically, we've gone from FedEx back in the day, because it's overnight, that's pretty fast. Then we went to money transfers, wire transfers, because that's really fast. Mm-hmm. The kiosk is the same thing, and they're everywhere. 4 years ago, I think there were like 2,000 of these things. Now there's 35,000 of them. A crypto, ATM. You can call it a kiosk, but really it's an ATM. Often it's right next to the other ATM.
Right.
That's all it is. And what the con man will do is say, somebody's hacked into your account. You're going to lose all of the money in your bank account unless you withdraw all of it and put it into cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency can't be traced by the bad guys. Well, what if I were to just open a new account? No, you can't do that because they have your social security number. The only way to protect it is crypto. And then they say, no, there's one right a mile from your house. They'll go on Google Maps, they'll find it, and they'll tell them, here's where you go. Stay on the phone with me.
Right.
And then deposit $10,000 in cash into this thing. And by the way, we're going to make it easy for you by giving you a QR code. So you don't have to worry about all the warnings that you're going to get from the machine and everything. But the QR code they give you is their QR code to their account.
Right.
And so you never get it back. You'll never get it back, right? So it's really just the latest way the cons men use to get their money fast while people are still worried they're about to lose all their money.
So one of the things that I've heard in these stories related to the crypto ATMs and the crypto kiosks is that the scammers are telling the individual, you've got to move the money or something has gone wrong and you're going to be put in jail, so don't contact law enforcement. But really, we should remind people that law enforcement's actually there to help us, right? And that they are actually aware of these kinds of scams, and nobody just gets put into jail like that.
That's true, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's someone calling pretending to be the police, and you miss jury duty and the money should go through crypto. There's all the different scams that we've cataloged over the years are using these crypto ATMs. I think of them as the scammer's getaway car. I think that's really what it amounts to. I don't see a legitimate use case for these machines. They're charging 15 to 20% fees when you put the money in. The vast majority of the use is to help the scammer get away, right? Mm-hmm. And if you really wanted to invest in cryptocurrency, there's a million places you can do it. And they'll charge you, online, a million places you can do it, and they'll charge you 1%, 2%.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense other than a lot of people are making money at it. And the vast majority of the victims are older people. So what are Doug's top 3 tips for preventing scams and frauds, or protecting yourself from scams and frauds? Your top 3. Yeah. Well, I hate to say this, but I think this sort of like the fraud fighter mindset is you just have to assume. Here's what I say to myself. Anytime I get a message, an email, a pop-up, a text message, a phone call, that I didn't initiate, I assume it's a scam. You're guilty until proven innocent. When it comes to those unsolicited things, that's just the reality of it. The other thing is, if you're experiencing a lot of stress in your life, understand that's what makes you vulnerable. It's not because you're old or young or educated or uneducated. It's because stress, there's this whole idea of cognitive load theory too, right? Which is you're managing, that's really what it is. You're preoccupied with my mom. I don't know about my mom. She just fell and I've got to worry about that. The phone rings, right? And it's jury duty. You missed jury duty or something. So if something's going on in your life, that's another big warning sign. And the other big thing is with regard to this, your identity being stolen type stuff, is monitor your accounts.
Okay.
Watch those accounts. Get online access, if you don't have it, to your bank accounts, to your credit card accounts, and look at them every day. I mean.
So I get this question fairly often, which is, I think I've been scammed. Who should I contact? Who should I tell or report it to?
Well, it sort of depends on what kind of a scam it is as to where you go first. But on the list for sure is the local police, especially if it's one of those like jury duty scams. Police need to know about that type of stuff. The Attorney General's office, we have a really strong Attorney General's office here. That's another place. And also the FTC has a hotline. I would start with local, though. I'd start with the police and start with the AG's office. Yeah.
Thanks for coming by.
My pleasure.
It's so interesting. so interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And really appreciate all the work that you're doing to keep people safe.